Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation on the connection between intrinsic motivation and your employee engagement strategy. This webcast is part of SHRM's webcast series. You can see a list of available and upcoming events at shrm.org/webcast, and you can get details of new and upcoming programs from SHRM's e-newsletters, including HR Daily and HR Week. Before we get started, we want to provide you some information about our program. SHRM would like to thank today's program sponsor, Limeade, for helping make this webcast available to the HR community. Today's program looks at the differences between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. You'll hear about the science behind intrinsic motivation and its application for increasing employee engagement, as well as how to use both extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. To lead this unique look at this topic, we're pleased to welcome Laura Hamill and Toni Best. Here's a bit about each of our speakers. Laura Hamill is the Managing Director of the Limeade Institute and the Chief People Officer at Limeade. Dr. Hamill leads the company's people team, and she's responsible for nurturing the Limeade culture. She worked on the Limeade founding team to develop the world's first and most comprehensive well-being assessment. Dr. Hamill has 20 years of experience implementing research, assessment, and culture strategies in organizations. Also with us today is Toni Best. She is the Chief Human Performance Officer at Aduro, based in Redmond, Washington. She thrives on pushing the edge and showing people they are capable of more than they thought. A certified intrinsic coach and certified valuation specialist, Dr. Best serves people through eliciting best thinking and removing interference to inborn health and well-being. We have a full room today and a full agenda, so with introductions complete, I'm happy on behalf of our audience to welcome our first speaker today, Dr. Laura Hamill.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be with you here today. It's great to be with Toni too. Our agenda, we want to talk about this idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and really break those two ideas apart and talk a bit about why does intrinsic motivation matter so much and how is it connected to employee engagement. And then Toni's going to talk about some really great application examples, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So what we're trying to cover today is just actually answer what seems like a really basic question, which is why do we do what we do? It's really the fundamental question behind this topic. So why is it that we go to work every day? Why is it that we actually help our coworkers when we're at work? Why do we participate in sports or hobbies? There's actually a lot of reasons why we do what we do. And sometimes the answer to that is just really complicated and complex. And many times we're not even aware of why we do what we do. To start it off, let's just try to take a really simple example. How do you get your child to brush her teeth? So it seems like a pretty straightforward question, but there's a lot behind it. So one approach you could take is you could give her a toothbrush and give her toothpaste, and then you could give her $15 a month to actually brush her teeth, which just makes us giggle, right? It just sounds like a silly approach. More likely, we're going to teach her how to brush her teeth. We're going to coach her and encourage her, and maybe even tell her why she should do it. What we'd hope is that eventually she'll get to the point where she sees the value in brushing in her own teeth, maybe even to the point where she enjoys the actual activity itself of brushing her teeth, that she doesn't just do it because of the outcome or trying to avoid a bad dentist visit. So you can see something that's so simple, so straightforward, there can be a lot behind it, and it can be pretty complex. So this is really what we're digging into. So the concept within motivation, a really simple concept, is breaking down motivation into two buckets. It's the idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And the concept behind this is first with intrinsic motivation, that we do things because of the actual interest or the enjoyment of the task itself. So the work itself, the task itself, is actually a reward. So you might feel a sense of enjoyment or growth, or it might be fun or an opportunity for you to really express yourself. But what's key here is it's about the task itself. Now, extrinsic is about not the task itself. It's about what happens as an outcome of doing the task. So what happens kind of after you've done the task? So might you get a promotion or a pay raise or a bonus or some sort of prize or perk? So it's really the difference is about intrinsic is with the task, within the task itself you get some sort of reward, and with extrinsic it's outside of the task. So you can think about examples like, why do you read a book? More than likely, it's some sort of intrinsic motivation, right? There's some sort of reason why it feels good and enjoyable for you to do the task of reading the book. But you can get a little bit more complicated. You think about why we work. Why we work has multiple components. I hope for many people that there is a big intrinsic motivation component to why we work, that there's some sort of enjoyment we get, purpose, growth. But there's probably always some extrinsic rewards that we get from working too. So maybe it is about getting a promotion and feeling like you get that kind of external validation that you're growing in your career, or that you get some pay increase. So you can see that for many things we do in our lives, it's a combination of reasons. Now there's some important nuances for us to think about within intrinsic and extrinsic. So first, with intrinsic, I think we have a tendency to think about this as it's all just such great positive feelings. It's all kind of rainbows when we have intrinsic motivation, and it's really important to note that it actually can be hard when you're intrinsically motivated. It might not always feel good in the moment, so sometimes our best growth situations or best growth opportunities don't really feel that great, but they really do make you feel excited about your work. So that's an important nuance about intrinsic motivation. It doesn't always feel fun and good. Also with extrinsic motivation, I think we have a tendency to think about this as just money or just kind of something really tangible that you get. It also can be something like the perception that I'm winning. The only reason maybe you are doing something is because at the end you can feel like you've won, or maybe even that you haven't failed. So it's another nuance with extrinsic is that it's not just about tangible outcomes, it's also about kind of that external feeling of winning. So why do we care about these things? We care about intrinsic motivation especially because it's so powerful. So when a task is intrinsically motivating, so the work you're doing is intrinsically motivating, you're just more likely to be curious and interested, you're more likely to keep going. You're also more likely to set challenging goals for yourself that can really help you succeed, and also have a sense of ownership, that you feel like it's your work, it's your responsibility. And then finally, there's some interesting research on the concept of flow. Intrinsic motivation really can result in more opportunities for you to have this experience of flow, which is a really neat concept. Hopefully all of you who are listening have felt this way before, but when you feel such a connection with your work that time just flies by, that you're so connected that you almost feel like kind of at one with the work. And that's when you can do some of your most creative work. It's when you can feel really the most productive, is when you have that connection. So this is why intrinsic motivation matters a lot, because really powerful things can happen with your work when you're intrinsically motivated. So there's been a lot of research on intrinsic motivation. People who are intrinsically motivated tend to be higher performers. They put more effort into their work, they're more creative, they share more of what they've learned, they end up staying longer in the organization that they work in, and they tend to like their job more. There's also been some other research around intrinsic motivation being related to lower burnout, lower stress levels. So there's something kind of really important about this feeling that people can have about their work. Now let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about two particular other cases of rewards that people bring up often, and it's about the idea of using monetary incentives and punishment. So using monetary rewards, this is really in our work in this kind of in the traditional wellness industry and in HR in general, there's really been a big emphasis on using monetary rewards to get people to participate. In fact, it kind of blows my mind a little bit that we tend to lead with things like incentive designs and skip a lot of the other things that are a little bit more important. We talk a lot about incentives. What's really interesting, though, that is if the actual task that you're asking somebody to do, the work that you're asking somebody to take on, if in theory that work is inherently motivating, there should be goodness to it, there should be reasons why people want to participate, bad things can happen when you actually add monetary rewards. So it's a concept called the over-justification effect. It's the idea that if you offer external rewards for something that should be internally rewarding, you actually get a decrease in intrinsic motivation. So what happens is when you pay somebody to do something that they might already want to do, they're going to think in their head that they did it because they got paid to do it, not because they wanted to do it. This over-justification effect has been studied over and over again. Real simple example, a study that happened in the 70s with nursery school kids. They were all, in this experiment, asked to do a drawing test. They were given some really cool art supplies, and they were asked to do a drawing task. But a subset of them was actually given, at the end, this big certificate saying that they were an amazing artist. Then some of the other kids were not in that condition. And then later, those kids were asked to come back in and play with those art supplies again. And what they found is that those kids who got the certificate, again, an extrinsic reward, were less likely to play with those art supplies. So that's just one example. This has been studied pretty thoroughly. Example of how something like just drawing for kids should be inherently intrinsically motivating. But when we put something external on it, people do funny things to themselves where they have now decided that the reason why they do it isn't because they like it, it's because they got paid or rewarded to do it. So I think this is a really important concept in this wellness industry that we have been a part of, is that we've paid people to participate in well-being programs, right? Inherently, focusing on my own well-being should be pretty motivating. It should be something that I care about. But when we put these external rewards on them, then people start thinking they do it because they got paid. So now what's really, I guess, a big question mark is, are those programs really inherently rewarding, right? So that's the thing that we have to work harder on, is making it so that people want to participate. So there are cases where monetary incentives, bonuses can work. This is when we're getting people to try something new that they've never tried before. They don't see the inherent or kind of intrinsic motivation of the thing that we're asking them to do, or to help drive compliance. So if they think participating in a well-being program is a compliance activity, then that's a lot of the reason why we end up doing these incentives. So we really, I think in our industry, have to work more on making our programs intrinsically motivating. One other kind of interesting topic is the idea of punishment and avoiding pain. So it's obvious, I think, that most of us try to avoid pain. That it's probably a good idea to avoid pain. I think we definitely, in the human resources space, we sometimes set things up where we take away something from people, or we penalize employees if they don't do something that we want them to do. And, it works in the short term. It can work. It can get people to do that one thing that you want them to do. The problem is it creates a lot of negative feelings about the program, the company, when we do those kinds of things. And in many cases, it's not worth what the negative that we created isn't worth the thing that we actually wanted that person to do in the first place. So also, people won't do anything more than just what we asked them to do when we were about to punish them. So it really doesn't help us have anything besides just that particular requirement. So in general, we would suggest that you don't take an approach of pain avoidance as a strategy when you're trying to motivate employees. So if there's all this science on the value of intrinsic motivation, why in the heck do we still do all of this in practice? So there's a real disconnect between what science says and what we practice. So how is that so? Well, one of the reasons why is just the crazy impact that history and legacy can have on how we do things. So extrinsic rewards might have been more effective in earlier times when we worked in factories and we had very repetitive work and very compliance-driven work, so kind of an old model of work, much more routine work. But the thing is, a lot of our work now doesn't fall into that kind of category. A lot of our work isn't routine. There's also another reason why we might have this big disconnect between what science tells us and what we actually do. There's some interesting research that was conducted in 1999 that was around this assumption that there's a general tendency for us to assume that other people are motivated by money. But we ourselves, of course, are motivated for intrinsic reasons. And so it's a really interesting kind of disconnect between others and self. So I think that we, when we're designing HR practices, just assume that we have to do that because that's what those other people do. You know, I am much more deep and more intrinsically motivated, but those other people, I know all they want is money. So there's just this sort of inertia that we have around doing this kind of old approach to using extrinsic rewards. So to me, it's just really interesting that we, in big companies especially, right, we have compensation and benefits departments, but we have very few, groups that are focused on job design, ensuring that the work itself is, inherently interesting, that there's meaning and purpose in the work that we do, but we definitely have comp and ben departments. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of intrinsic motivation and employee engagement. So what really motivates us to be engaged at work? There's a really deep connection, actually, between intrinsic motivation and employee engagement. So let's just start with the definition of employee engagement. So employee engagement is a deep connection and sense of purpose at work. So again, there's this kind of thing that I'm connected to what I'm doing. And when I have that deep connection and sense of purpose, I have extra energy and I'm more committed to the organization. And I think it's to the point of a truism now that this is a good thing for employees and it's a good thing for the employer. There's all kinds of results that will be better if an employer has an engaged workforce. So when engaged, employees are intrinsically motivated. Now remember we were talking at the beginning around the concept of enjoyment and purpose and feeling like I'm growing. Doesn't that sound like an engaged employee? So really you can think about these topics as being very overlapping. This is some research that I thought was really important. So what aspects of intrinsic rewards actually are statistically related to employee engagement? So these four, in this study from Thomas in 2009, these four were the ones that were found to be the strongest drivers of employee engagement. So the first one is the idea of meaning. So the work I do matters. I'm passionate about it. It's important. It makes a difference. Choice. That I actually get to decide how I fulfill that meaning that I just was talking about. I get to decide and choose how my work happens. I have some authority. I'm trusted. I have the information I need to do my job. I have voice in how I do my work. The third one's, I think, really interesting. It's this idea of competence, that I'm able to master some of the work that I do, that I have something I'm good at, and that I'm able to actually, not always completely hit it out of the park, but sometimes get the feedback that I'm doing a really good job. And then the fourth one is around progress, that I feel like even though it's hard, that we've got milestones and we're meeting them and that we're celebrating some success and that I have some sort of concept or measurement of improvement. So those four things together, I think, are really important when we think about designing our work. In fact, this morning I was just brainstorming with the person who's in charge of our people team, and we were talking about these four areas. And, it's hard to have, some of these are easier for some companies than others. For us, the competence one is a really hard one because we are changing so fast, and that the goalposts are changing all the time around what we're doing and what we're responsible for, and it's just really hard to feel that feeling that we're doing good, we're doing a good job. So I think this is a really, these four ideas I think could be a really important way to think about how we design work. One other kind of interesting idea, I think I mentioned before that intrinsic motivation is very much linked to the concept of stress and burnout. Some research that we did recently in Limeade Institute supported that concept. What we found is that employees who reported higher levels of employee engagement actually had the lowest levels of self-reported stress. which is so interesting because on the surface, you might think that somebody who's engaged is intense, they're all in, they're working really hard, that they might be really stressed. But what we found is actually that is not the way the person thinks about it. They are more likely to say they're not stressed. And what I think is really interesting is this idea of how we frame things in our head, right? When we're really engaged at work, maybe we don't think about it as stress. Maybe when we're not engaged at work is when we think about it as stress. So there's something about how we talk to ourselves, how we frame our situations that really put something important here. Now, you might also argue it's not about framing. It might be the way the organization is supporting me so I don't feel stressed. But I think that there's something here. Finally, just to kind of make the connection back to why we care about this, this is something that's been, again, studied over and over again, but engaged workforces really mean better business results. These are just a sample of some studies. So engaged workforces have higher growth rates, they're more profitable, they're more productive, they tend to have fewer safety incidents, higher levels of customer satisfaction, innovation, retention. It's been studied so much that it is a truism now, that it's better to have an engaged workforce. So really thinking hard about the concept of intrinsic motivation and how it's related to employee engagement, I think is a really important piece. So now what I want to do is pass it over to Toni, and Toni's going to talk about some of the work that she does at Aduro and how this is so connected to intrinsic motivation.
Thank you, Laura. That was wonderful, and as always, I learn something new every time I get to work with you, so I appreciate those insights so much. Can you believe that Limeade and Aduro have been partnering together for 10 years?
No.
It's crazy. I know. Time flies so much. And for everyone out there watching today, the Limeade and Aduro partnership has been really vital to our collective success with our clients. We've really been aligned since the very beginning on our approach of treating people like people and how we can bring together the best of data and technology and a human touch to really help organizations and individuals meet their goals. And that's what's made our partnership so long-lasting and how we can stay so tightly integrated. And it turns out we're also very aligned on this concept of intrinsic motivation and the power that it holds. So the overall goal for your organization is to have a happy, high-performing, and engaged workforce, right? So to achieve this, you're not only tasked with the challenge, but also the opportunity to provide resources that lead to positive change for your employees. And once an individual can break through and understand exactly what they want to accomplish and what drives them from the inside, they can really choose what areas of their life they want to focus on and how they can achieve their goals. So the first step to designing an intrinsic-driven program is providing your participants with the resources to become aware of the current state of their life and their own well-being. And then they can find that powerful intrinsic motivation. This can be done in many ways. So for instance, you might help bring awareness to them on the current state of their health through a biometric screening. Or maybe they take an online assessment and it shows them that their emotional well-being is below average. Maybe they answer a pulse question about how they feel about their work, or maybe they read an interesting article that elicits new thinking and reveals some of their underlying values that they haven't really been in touch with, and it brings them to the surface. Or perhaps they're just using a device or an app to measure their steps or their sleep, and they realize that reality is actually quite different from their assumptions. So developing awareness isn't a one-time thing, and it doesn't stop after any of these assessments or even after an aha moment. It's an ongoing experience that continually is about them getting to know themselves better. These new learnings about ourselves or the resurfacing of things that we have buried can drive us to engage or re-engage in our quest to improve ourselves. All right, so in this quest to improve ourselves, the drive to take action, or at least to begin to consider it for the first time, is the start of our transformative habit change model. And just like life, the experience of being human isn't necessarily linear, but it's hard to put that together in a visual, isn't it? So this model acknowledges that before an individual can act on their motivations effectively and consistently to create this long-lasting change, they must first go through a process to find the intrinsic value. That's the why of habit change. This process of discovery and engagement refers to the awareness that we just talked about, and how an individual chooses to change relies on the opportunities and the resources that we offer them. So you may offer opportunities such as joining a challenge, participating in a group coaching program, or passively consuming some content, maybe working one-on-one with a coach. And the topics and activities that you allow them to engage in will determine whether the program really captures what matters most to them. And the goal is to find what they want to change at the deepest level. So a person may bounce back and forth between discovery and engagement for a long time. I call this dabbling. And this is, the moment where they find something out about themselves, and then, maybe they're alarmed about the circumference of their waist that they find out at a biometric screening, and so they try the grapefruit diet. Then they try the Whole30. Then they become paleo. Then they become vegetarian, and the list goes on and on. They're just dabbling. And so what's missing here is what we call the ignite moment. In this example of the waist circumference, the ignite moment is that moment when the person realizes that losing weight isn't even the goal. Being able to be present and energetic with their kids so they can lead and guide them in the way they want to is actually the goal. And if you give me 20 people that want to lose weight, I'll give you 20 different deep-seated whys as to what will drive them to succeed. Losing weight is a strategy, and it's just one strategy that will help them reach their true goal. So we use the science of axiology, which is the study of nature and valuation, to facilitate these ignite moments through technology, through content, and through personalization of their program to bring someone out of their extrinsic thinking, or what should I do based on the forces impacting me from outside of myself, and outside of their systemic thinking, which is that more linear thought involving the process of how do I do this, and more into intrinsic thinking, the why should I do what matters most to me, and how will this impact my life in a way that will make me come more alive. So once this ignite moment is uncovered, the work isn't over. We recommend choosing micro habits, these small, simple habits called tiny habits by B.J. Fogg. Small wins here as they're practicing these micro habits help individuals to learn optimism as opposed to learning pessimism, which is a key concept of positive psychology, helping them to win versus learn that they are helpless. So, of course, this individual must reconnect with their ignite moment over and over again to keep that motivation alive. So, let's pull this all together through an example. Meet Carmen. This is Carmen. And Carmen takes an assessment, and she sees that her sleep scores are low. And so she notes that she's actually really interested in getting better sleep. She's prompted and nudged through technology to read an article about the importance of sleep, and also inquires about her current status and what she wants to do about it. So she decides to sign up for the Sleep Mode Path, which is an on-demand learning tool. And she realizes her lack of sleep is apparent when her attention span wanes during a 2 p.m. meeting, and she's uncharacteristically short with her coworker. And then later on, she snaps at her fiance over a simple question about dinner. So with these realizations, she decides to engage with a coach, and she gets even greater clarity on what is important to her about getting good sleep. She recognizes that she's felt a little stuck. She wants to grow in her career. She knows that her presence at work involves how well she works with her coworkers. She wants a strong relationship with her fiance, and she knows that her work life and her home life are tightly connected. So driven by this, and the connection of her sleep habits to her relationship and her quality of work, both which are high values for Carmen, she then practices good habits. For a great night's rest, she journals her wins of sleeping 7+ hours a night, hopefully, a little more than 7. She knows how it makes her feel and what other ways she sees the impact in her daily routine. How is this really affecting her? As a result, she's now sleeping well, and she has more energy in her day. She feels great about her work, and her overall productivity and her relationships at work and at home. And her work sees a more productive and collaborative employee, and her fiance really feels appreciated and cared for. And this gives her just a greater sense of connection and peace of mind at both work and home. So, Carmen is not very likely to stay engaged just because of a sole purpose of gathering points or extrinsic rewards. She might be going through the motions to gather those, but it's most important to help her get that ignite moment that will help her shape her new habits and propelling her to earn the true incentive that she's looking for, which is what really impacts her life on a greater level. So let me break this down just a little further and revisit Prochaska's stages of change for a moment. So if an individual is in this pre-contemplation stage around their health, this means that they're not even considering changing, either because they don't know there's a problem, they're denying there's a problem, or they're demoralized by previous attempts to change or even constant reminders from others about their need to change. I'm sure we've all felt that from time to time, right? And so if they don't know, then seeing the results of a biometric screening may be enough to help them take that next step. If they do know and they're denying it, maybe that biometric screening, also kind of brings it back to the forefront, or giving them a little education, some content to read about the results may push them further along that continuum towards action. But if they're in the demoralized group, as so many people in pre-contemplation are, targeting them with yet another weight loss program and an ill-timed phone call at dinner from a nurse who wants to discuss their health status is unlikely to get them the results they want and you the results that you're looking for as well. So instead, what if we surface challenges and content and programs that will actually align with their values, their aspirations, and their concerns? For instance, they may actually be feeling stressed about money, which decreases their resilience and willpower and drives them to eat all the wrong things at all the wrong times in order to deaden their feelings of anxiety. So a personalized program that understands this concern will recommend a simple budgeting path and an opportunity for one-to-one support from a coach. And this can move them to that next stage of contemplation. Now they may be ready to consider losing weight, they feel more in control, but maybe they're still experiencing some doubt and they may delay taking action unless a modality that makes them feel safe is offered. So offering on-demand or group or one-to-one opportunities, passive content, habit reminders, or challenges opens up their options to take action in a way that they feel like they can move at their own pace. So this is why it's important to personalize the experience, to help them move into considering making a change, preparing for a change, and then taking action to really make that change happen. According to a Harvard Business Review study and a survey of 465 full-time employees, roughly 75% say that personalization, customization of the approach is needed in a well-being program. And 53% feel there are cultural barriers that are preventing them from engaging and a lack of company support. So it's important to meet them where they are in that stage of change and in the way they like to engage. So ask them what they care about to make it meaningful and relevant to them. Build trust with them by giving them the opportunity to engage in that thing that is important to them in the moment, and engaging in budgeting versus that losing weight program. And this gives them a sense of importance and caring and ultimately treat them like people, right? Treat them like human beings instead of a bundle of risks. And this gives them this opportunity to engage in those things that they care about. It gives them these small wins, those great little feelings on the inside, the natural endorphins, and they learn optimism, and this opens them up to the things that they were previously uninterested in and felt they could not control or accomplish. Part of making a well-being program really meaningful to an individual is making sure you have programs that inspire the whole population. So not every person is the same. And we know that workforces can vary depending on the organization type, the location, and the tasks being performed in their work. So just take a moment and think about, what does your organization look like? Who are your people? Do they have entry-level positions that are filled by recent graduates? Those people might want to focus on a program that relates to finances to pay off student loans or relieve their financial stress. Providing employees with the opportunity to focus on what they want to work on will bring out their intrinsic motivation. And to solidify this concept, Aduro did a study of 35,000 respondents who could choose to focus on one of 4 key areas: health and fitness, money and prosperity, growth and development, and contribution and sustainability. And here you see that 51% of them chose something other than health and fitness as their target. This is a really big deal, especially if you don't have a well-being program that is able to focus on more than health and fitness. You're missing out on 51% of your population that doesn't want to engage in those programs. And so well-being programs can be tailored for each organization, and they can be personalized for the individuals within that organization. It's important to assess both your organizational goals and think about how to resonate with each person, the entire population. So I've mentioned these human moments several times during this workshop so far. So, these can occur through intentional transformational learning content and technology, but sometimes good old-fashioned human-to-human interaction is still important, and I don't think it's ever going to be replaced completely by technology, right? So what kind of boring world would that be? So in addition to an accountability partner, as people often think of a coach, we strongly believe in having a coach who's available to guide individuals through their well-being journey and help keep their intrinsic motivation in focus, to elicit new thinking that drives that ignite moment we discussed earlier. A coach also provides us overall support and is a resource for habit change. As a person's going through those practice steps, inevitably we fall backwards into old habits, and that coach can help get us back on track. And, focusing on practicing those micro habits can really lead to macro change. We consider coaches to be think partners that are there for the participant each step of their well-being journey. And this human element all begins with choice and personalization. We believe that engagement at its core means that an individual is deeply engaged in their life. And an excellent coaching experience helps them in that quest to achieve the things that matter to them, to help them get into that concept of flow that Laura talked about earlier, to feel challenged, to feel supported, and to feel fulfilled all at the same time. All right, so I've talked a lot about how we reach individuals, but what about a real-time example of an organization-wide program that's matched their values and the business goals to that organization? The Port of Seattle is a public organization who serves the important economic role to the city of Seattle through their bustling seaport and airport. So they've got 2,000 employees, and the Port feels like they represent them outside of work, and they want to provide a program that offers their employees a holistic approach to health while keeping their employees engaged as possible in the organization. And their interim executive director, Dave Solke, says, if they're engaged as an employee, they're working harder and more effectively here for the organization. It should be about the employee and what's good for them. So when we think about exactly what drives employees to become better versions of themselves, it can be quite varied. In this example, Earl is highly involved in community service. He's helping these kids learn baseball, work as a team, and he's really motivated by their success. And in fact, he describes him as a proud dad when he sees these kids transformed from young men into adults. And he gets his energy from his volunteer work. He connects that to performing better at work. And he's really grateful that the Port supports his efforts. And he says that it drives his engagement in his work because this is meaningful to him, and it's part of his overall well-being program. Manette Moses is the Director of Health and Safety. So great. Every organization deserves a Manette. She's so into this program and the people and really helping them to come to life through their work and through the program. And, she says that giving them the choice to do what is meaningful to them is the key element of their program that's really provided the motivation for their employees to participate in their Spirit of Wellness program. And, she's just great to work with, and their program is really cool. This is shown by the Port's results, and they've seen their participation rates increase from 28% to nearly 90% over the last couple of years. So a few examples of what their employees have contributed. They ask their employees to bring their ideas into the program, and then they put them into the program, which is really awesome. So they have a virtual Bring Your Pet to Work day. So they obviously can't bring all of their pets to, the port or to the airport, right? So they have this place where they can post pictures of their pets, and they also have the opportunity to adopt pets during the stay. So really cool. They also have a port-sponsored float, and 70 employees participated in the Gay Pride Parade in Seattle. They said that was important to them. The port put it into place. They have community service projects, environmental cleanup projects, and more. And this is what drives that 90% engagement.
So that was a great example with the port. How can we think about this for you and your programs, of those of you who are listening? How can we move away from relying so heavily on extrinsic rewards? So when we talk to people who are starting a new program, it's a great opportunity actually to not really rely heavily on financial rewards. Don't create really intricate incentive design programs if you're in the wellness industry or any other kind of similar industry. Try to think about creating a program that actually is intrinsically motivating. So we actually, every once in a while, run into a company who's just starting from scratch. And so that's our recommendation to them, is really try to not do that. But that's actually not true for many people. They actually already have an existing program. So what do you do if you've already been using a lot of extrinsic rewards to get people to participate? So there's a couple different ways we've seen this work. One of them is something we call a step-down approach. And this is just the idea of, if you already are doing a lot of monetary incentives in particular, try to actually over time slowly step down from that and do less monetary, maybe more of what we'll talk about in a minute, what we call inspiring rewards or intrinsic rewards.
And in this case, when you're stepping down that program, Laura, it's so important that you're continuously personalizing the program for the individuals even more, and that'll kind of help the two balance each other out, because they'll be more intrinsically driven to participate, right?
Exactly. So what are this idea of inspiring rewards? Remember when we were talking about before, anything that is external to the work itself, that is considered an extrinsic reward, but I think there are some extrinsic rewards that actually could be a little bit more meaningful than other extrinsic rewards, and that's what we call inspiring rewards. So these are things that actually, if you think about it, there's actually some underlying meaning here, purpose, growth, that you get from these kinds of inspiring rewards. So if you get to have maybe a customer visit and go learn about a particular customer and how your company is impacting that customer, there's some growth there, right? And then some meaning and purpose. If you get to actually do some team level rewards where you get training on a topic that your whole team cares about, again, meaning and purpose and some growth there. So we really recommend that we think creatively and really think about, for the particular company that you're working at, what would matter to the people that work here? How can we really make that feel very inspiring? And how can we move away from stuff that just doesn't have a lot of meaning, like gift cards and things like that, right? So how can we create something? It's a lot more work to do this kind of inspiring rewards, but it actually has so much more, it creates so much more of a connection for employees. So finally, what we think is that we really need to think about using both intrinsic and extrinsic. I think even probably the way I talk about it, it tends to be very kind of antagonistic almost, that one's better than the other. I definitely feel like intrinsic is so powerful because it's so closely related to employee engagement, but there's a time and a place for everything, and we have to look at everybody's jobs. And as we were talking about earlier, not every job has been designed to be intrinsically motivating, right? There are jobs that actually are focused on repetition and quantity, and they're not maybe inherently interesting. So those jobs actually might be some that require some form of extrinsic motivation. But other jobs actually are more focused on creativity, and they're complex and they're hard, and we need people to dig in, and we really are focusing on quality. In those cases, we really need to think about the use of intrinsic rewards.
And I think, too, when we think about just getting people to try something new for the first time, getting them to engage in a program that is sponsored by their employer, not everybody has that same level of trust. So just kind of giving them a boost to get involved in the first place is a great place to use the extrinsic rewards, and then kind of set them free to explore what really matters to them and what's going to feed them from the inside. Yeah.
Awesome. So to wrap it up, the kind of key takeaways, we really think that it's important to focus on why, making sure our employees are always connected to meaning and purpose and why we're doing what we're doing. And then, obviously, as Toni focused on, personalizing the experience, really meeting people where they are, digging deep into root causes. It's so important to think about personalization. And finally, supporting the journey. This is kind of the whole point, I think, of this whole presentation is around what can organizations do to create conditions so that employees can feel intrinsically motivated. So we feel that organizations have a responsibility to support employees and really create those conditions where they can be engaged at work.
When they feel supported, they also feel better about being challenged, and then they really feel like they're more fulfilled in their work and the things that they're asked to do. So all those things matter.
Great. So I think that's it for us. I want to open it up to Q&A.
Thank you. Before we turn to our audience questions, we do have a couple of announcements. SHRM thanks Limeade for sponsoring this program and SHRM's series of free webcasts. With Limeade technology, employers can boost employee engagement by improving well-being and strengthening workplace culture. Limeade helps companies invest in their people so employees can feel good and reconnect to their purpose at work. To learn more, visit Limeade, Limead.com. Okay, let's turn to some of the questions that have come in during the hour, and there's still time to get them in. Audience member asks, do you believe that managers can actually motivate their employees? Isn't motivation really an internal thing as opposed to something you can do or encourage on someone else?
Wow, I got all excited about that one. So absolutely. So there's this really interesting idea, right, where employees come to work with maybe a propensity to be intrinsically motivated and to be really engaged at work. I sort of use those interchangeably. So there's a huge role that the person plays, absolutely. But they actually have to come into a situation where the work is designed in a way that there's some sort of interesting part, some aspect of the work, and that they have to have a manager who creates the conditions that allow that person to be intrinsically motivated. And the culture has to be aligned with that. So let me just give some examples. It's pretty important, I think we were talking about the idea of choice, right? So in order to have choice, there's got to be autonomy, right? You've got to be able to actually believe that you have the freedom to make some choice about how you do your work. So your manager plays a huge role in creating the conditions of autonomy. We've all had those managers where that is not the case, right? Where you're micromanaged, controlled down to the minute. So that autonomy is just one component that needs to be in place at the manager level. Now, underlying all that is the culture that manager is working within, right? And so that culture actually has to have a lot of trust built into it in order for autonomy to happen, in order for that choice to play out. That's just one concept, right, where that whole kind of level of culture and climate support has to be there no matter what the employee is like, right? So it's really, to me, it absolutely has a role for the employee who comes in, that they play a large role, but just as important is the way that the organization supports that employee. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, we're also hearing a lot more lately, especially in the coaching field, and things that we're hearing from organizations as we ask, is that there's more and more this need for a coaching culture, not reaching outside of your organization to find a coach, but actually the manager as coach, where, that manager has this connection with each one of their people, where, they understand what matters to the person. They're continuously kind of tapping into that. They're asking them questions about, how they can improve their work, their life, and they're really engaging on that level. So I think manager as coach is also what kind of helps to drive that intrinsic motivation as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's such a great concept, the manager as coach, because they're not solving the problems for them. Right? They're helping the employee by the questions that they ask so that they can start doing it for themselves.
Yes. And they're finding that growth in that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Continuing with audience questions, another audience member wonders what role you think communication plays in the process of engaging employees, particularly organizational communication.
Gosh, The concept of communication is such an interesting one. I think it's inherently connected with culture and like talking about and being transparent about what's important. And so we sort of think about communication as a function, as like, somebody just has that job, but it actually is much more about the norms and values of openness and honesty and transparency. So I think it's humongous. It's huge in terms of how important it is to actually thinking about creating an engaged workforce. And I think one of the main ways is around the creation of trust. Because how we communicate, what we communicate, the way we communicate says a lot about whether or not the organization, the employees will trust the organization, and whether or not the organization trusts its employees. We really see it as a reciprocal. It goes both ways. It's not just one way or the other. So communication is a huge kind of a tool. Think of it as maybe a tool for creating that trust. And I think, the truth-telling is a part of that, especially when something bad happens, maybe when the organization's not doing so well or something bad happens in the business. How do we handle that? And how do we tell the truth? And how do we acknowledge things that are hard and maybe not so great? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, too, it's important to remember when we think about communication that at the end of the day, we're all people, right? So each one of us has our own filter that we see the world through, that we read and we hear communications through. And so it's important not only to communicate clearly, and as Laura said, that transparency and building trust is important, but also to communicate and communicate and communicate, like continuously saying what you've said over and over again to make sure that it's kind of getting through. And sometimes when you communicate something, people hear it in one way, and it's important to just kind of keep reiterating your message in different ways so that you're getting the points across that you're trying to and driving those programs forward.
Several folks have asked questions like this. I'm going to combine a couple of them. How important is it for senior leadership to sponsor this type of program? Another audience member asked, how can you get buy-in from senior executives who may be skeptical of the value of intrinsic rewards?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that senior leadership is vital to drive a program like this. You can get a lot done with a grassroots movement, and especially depending on your culture. But if you've got a group of senior leaders that's not really bought in to the program that you're building, then it's actually really hard to get the traction inside. And the reason why it's hard to get the traction is because those senior leaders that aren't buying in are operating in one way, and you're kind of asking everybody else to operate in a different way. And so that senior leader buy-in really is important. And, if they're not buying into intrinsic rewards, I think, the science tells the story, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say is, obviously it depends on kind of what the influence kind of levers you want to pull with senior leaders. Some senior leaders very much the science story, the data story is the story to tell, and there's a really strong science story around intrinsic motivation. I think one of the things that's really interesting is just this idea. I think most people, senior leaders, managers, really understand this idea of hiring people who are passionate for their work, who have this extra energy for their work, right? We've bought into that somehow. What we haven't bought into as much is the work we need to do to support those people. And so I think that's the piece where you can show, this is the classic kind of trend in employee engagement is that employees, when they're first hired, have the highest levels of employee engagement, but at about 3 years, and this is pretty consistent across employee engagement surveys, and the time frame might be a little bit shorter or longer, but about 3 years, that level of engagement pretty much plummets, right? And we call that the honeymoon effect. So something happens when we hire people in, but then they sort of lose their sense of connection, and to me that says a lot about what is the organization not doing to continue that level of engagement. I think people come to the table, come to the employer wanting to feel that kind of deep connection with the work, and we fail them in a lot of ways in creating those conditions for them to feel that way. So I think there's a lot of data from employee engagement surveys to show the honeymoon effect. There's a lot of data from just the power of intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. And telling that story is really important. And, I think that also there are a lot of people who are in leadership positions who are a little old school, right? They're maybe more aligned to what I was saying about kind of the older era of how we think about work, a little more command and control, a little more hierarchical in how we think about work. And I think the millennials are going to force us to think a little bit differently because they're not going to stay. They're just not. And so if any of our organizations require actually having some kind of deeper meaning and purpose, it's just going to be really hard to keep millennials if we don't kind of change how we think about work.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll close with this question as we get to the top of the hour. An audience member asks, can you suggest some talking points when trying to educate employees about the value of intrinsic rewards when they participated in a wellness program based on monetary incentives for so many years?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing is, as we were kind of talking about that stepping down approach, you asked about talking points, but I also think that it's important that as you're changing from an extrinsic program to more of an intrinsic-based program, that the more that program gets personalized to them, that the data is being assimilated in a way that they're being presented with the things that matter to them, that they're being offered choice. The less you have to convince them that intrinsic rewards are what's great. And so I think first and foremost, you got to make sure that program is really being personalized to the individuals that are partaking in it. That's what's going to drive their intrinsic that intrinsic piece of them the most is just giving them things that they care about.
Yeah, and definitely it puts more emphasis, again, on us to design programs that actually are inherently interesting, right? We can't depend on paying people. We actually have to create programs that are meaningful and personalized and that make a difference for people. And, maybe that's meaning we have to be a lot more thoughtful about how the role of social connections in our programs, the role of inspiring rewards in our programs. So we just have to be much more thoughtful, I think, around the design of our programs. But I think the thing that's great about it is actually, if we do that, it's going to make a difference. We're going to see even higher levels of well-being and employee engagement.
Well, thank you. With that question and answer, we are going to bring today's webcast to a close. For our audience, we're going to close the program window in about 90 seconds, so this is your chance to download the certificate or the program PDF if you haven't done so already. When the window closes, you'll see an evaluation form pop up. We hope you'll fill that out. It helps us assess this event and plan for future webcasts. Before we sign off, we have a couple of final thanks. First to our presenters, Toni Best from Aduro and Laura Hamill from Limeade. Thank you for the unique perspectives you brought to today's program. And we want to thank you in the audience for joining us today and for choosing SHRM for HR webcasts. That concludes today's program.